Hello, Canada. This is the Canadian Citizen Journal, and I'm your host, Elias Tagay. Well, with election season right around the corner, I figured what a perfect place to start this video cast. Without further ado, let's get started on some interference in our elections.
Report from Canada's intelligence watchdog is pointing to disagreements between spies and political staffers over what kind of information on foreign interference was to be shown to the Prime Minister of this country. Kate McKenna is on the story for us this morning. Kate, it is a very significant report. Tell us more about who's written it and what is in it.
Well, it's a report that has some very strong language in it, Heather. This is a report by an independent intelligence watchdog, and it found in their words, black hole when it comes to the dissemination of intelligence. And it uses even more strong words than that, calling the flow of intelligence around the time of the 2021 election a demonstrably unacceptable state of affairs. So this watchdog, it's known as NCIRA, was tasked with this report last year when the reports were beginning to come out in the media, citing unnamed security sources that found that there was a lot of internal discussion between CSIS and the federal government when it came to foreign interference, specifically Chinese foreign interference. And some of these reports in the Globe and Mail indicated that the Canadian government, specifically the Liberals, benefited from this foreign interference. So that's sort of the origin of this report. And what it did, it took a deep dive into how intelligence is shared between CSIS and the federal government. And what it found...
Yeah, well, that's how later it started with some whistleblowers that came forward. And this is how it spins off. Get your turdo puke pails ready, because here's his spin.
Allegations that as of August 2019, you were aware of Chinese government funding of candidates ahead of that election. What did you know about Chinese government funding of election candidates, and when did you know it, and what did you do about it then?
One of the reasons that we are putting in place a special rapporteur on top of the work and the full access that NSI-COP and NCIRA have. The members, the Conservative, Liberal, and NDP and senators, members of the National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians will have access and have access to all top secret documents, all briefings that might have been made or could have been made or were not made from CSIS to parliamentarians. The process around this remains something that we have to make sure is looked at by parliamentarians and by experts who have proper security clearances for it.
Well, now, here's what mainstream and the Liberal NDP have not told you.
Heads up.
Okay, great.
So Charles, you're there, and Sam will have right here.
Good morning, welcome to the National Press Theatre. Before we begin, we have a few important preventive measures to share to prevent disruptive and potentially harmful audio feedback incident that can cause injuries. We remind all in-person participants to keep their earpiece away from the microphone at all time. When you are not using your earpiece, please place it face down on the middle of the sticker for the purpose that you will find on the table. Thank you all for your cooperation. You may proceed.
Good morning. Canada's democracy has been under attack by authoritarian regimes. Chief among them is the People's Republic of China. And I'm joined today by leading experts on foreign interference. Sam Cooper, investigative journalist and author of Willful Blindness, 3rd edition. Dr. Charles Burton, senior fellow at Synopsis. And Michelle Junot-Katsuya, former Asia-Pacific Desk Chief at CSIS, the Canadian Security Intelligence Service. We're here today to address a question that all Canadians have been asking. Who are the parliamentarians who have been identified in a confidential report by the National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians? In their special report, paragraph 164 states that NSICOP has, quote, seen troubling intelligence that some parliamentarians are, in the words of the intelligence services, semi-witting or witting participants in the efforts of foreign states to interfere in our politics, end quote. How can Canada have an election if Canadians don't know whether the people they're voting for has their best interests at heart or if they're serving a foreign master? Nearly every opposition party leader has called for the names of the parliamentarians identified in the NSICOP report, but the Trudeau government refuses to do so. This plays directly into the hands of authoritarians. Until those names are identified, a cloud of suspicion hangs over all parliamentarians, but especially those of Chinese heritage. It's time for the government to come clean to Canadians and defend our democracy. Sam.
Thank you, MP Vaughan.
Sorry to pause, everybody, but this is Sam Cooper. This guy is a national treasure. If his name is on it, read it or watch it.
I'm here today to highlight some of the names and entities covered in my updated book and to pose a question. Should other Canadian journalists be examining the openly available evidence surrounding these networks? Firstly, my book recounts reporting on a 2020 tape recording provided to me, where Senator Yuen Pao Wu is heard in a 47-minute private briefing with the Canada Committee 100 Society. This group included Conservative Senator Victor O as an advisory member, along with an individual officially listed in a Chinese United Front Overseas Leaders Group. The Canada Committee 100 Society is led in Vancouver by Ding Guo, a journalist who is also an advisor to British Columbia Premier David Eby. Other journalists participating in this tape-recorded meeting with Senator Wu later supported Liberal candidate Parm Bains in 2021. Bains had told these journalists he opposed Kenny Chiu's Foreign Agent Registry Bill, describing it as an exclusionary policy. Ding Guo was also reportedly involved in the 2022 Conservative Party leadership race, alongside community leaders officially connected to Beijing's overseas influence arm, the United Front. I can provide more details later on how this should illuminate NSICOP 2024. In the taped meeting, attendees asked Senator Wu about his stance regarding United Front Work Department community group activities in Canada. These groups, according to CSIS, are central to targeting Canadian politicians for influence and election interference. Senator Wu expressed his concerns about Canada's focus on United Front groups, stating, "Whether you belong to an organization that happens to be listed as a United Front organization should not be a litmus test," and added, "I am fighting very hard against that type of litmus test." To provide the evidence of this tape-recorded meeting, which my colleague Charles Burton, a sinologist and Mandarin language expert, reviewed and analyzed for myself, I'll briefly play a transcript from this meeting.
Having said that, I'm very worried that the mainstream in Canada, including a lot of my friends and political leaders and business leaders and media leaders, are falling into a very dangerous trap where they are using what I call a litmus test to demonstrate the loyalty of Chinese Canadians in this country. We can identify, for example, your views on Hong Kong, your views on Tibet, your views on leaders, your views on South China Sea, whether you belong to an organization that is officially part of the Community United Front. You know, many organizations are listed as part of a United Front list of organizations, and the fact that you are simply associated with one is often used as a litmus test. And this is not a good development that I see.
Mr. Burton, the sinologist and Mandarin language expert, reviewed the full tape recording and told me, quote, Senator Wu's briefing to Canada Committee 100 Society effectively enables the legitimacy of agencies of the Chinese Communist Party in our country. This does call into question Senator Wu's intervener status in the inquiry. Senator Wu didn't comment to me about his remarks, but said I should question the Hogue Commission, who also didn't comment. Ding Guo has said there is nothing inappropriate with Canada Committee 100 Society activities. Therefore, in Willful Blindness 3rd edition update, I write, in a way, Senator Wu's intervention in the Hogue Commission seemed to fulfill his taped pledge to the United Front. He repeatedly filed submissions undermining Canadian intelligence and using Chinese intelligence talking points. My confidence that he appeared to act for Beijing was bolstered by information from a person I call Confidential Source 1, who confirmed that Senator Wu, appointed by Justin Trudeau, was under CSIS investigation. Confidential Source 2 also repeatedly stressed that Conservative Senator Victor O, an advisor to the Canada Committee 100 Society, was a significant target in CSIS's investigation into federal election interference. In Willful Blindness, I write about investigations that began in early 2019. I write, according to 3 national security sources, Liberal Cabinet Minister Mary Ng was identified in CSIS investigations as one of 11 Toronto area candidates clandestinely supported by Chinese consulate and United Front influence networks in the 2019 election. CSIS assessed that Mary Ng was unwittingly implicated in this interference network. Despite my requests, Mary Ng and Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's office never responded for comment. As I write in Willful Blindness, Mary Ng was one of the key Ontario Liberal government staffers who moved to Ottawa with Trudeau, alongside more high-profile advisors like Katie Telford and Gerald Butts. 2 national security sources indicated that a specific CSIS concern was Ng's staff allegedly meeting privately with a Toronto consulate diplomat to consult on China-related issues. CSIS identified this diplomat, Zhou Wei, as a confirmed intelligence actor. According to one source, quote, we believe Zhou Wei worked with political staffers to provide information on meetings of elected officials and their whereabouts. We know staff have direction to report privately to the consulate on Mary Ng, end quote. This is a critical detail hinted at in the Hogue Commission's initial report, which, for some reason, did not disclose the involvement of Mary Ng's staff with Zhou Wei or clarify what this implies about Ng's position in Trudeau's cabinet. Thank you.
Charles.
Okay. Well, Sam Cooper's work these past many years has performed an important service for Canada in exposing the Chinese Communist Party's malign challenges to our democratic institutions and our rule of law. The issue now is the Government of Canada and the Parliament should do what to set things right? Justice Marie-Josée Og's Foreign Interference Commission appears to be floundering as the government, fearing negative exposure, withholds the most critical documents and engages in self-interested obfuscation. Moreover, Bill C-70's effectiveness will be in the interpretation of the language, such as the definition of in association with that Senator Wu talks about, the regulations developed to implement that bill, and the inclinations of whoever the government appoints as Foreign Influence Transparency Commissioner. If we don't get it right, we could end up with a Foreign Influence Transparency Registry that will have no names on it. Sam's work has benefited from the willingness of confidential informants to share classified materials with him. These are the people that the Prime Minister has denounced as criminals. They are accused of endangering Canada's national security by potentially exposing informants and methods of intelligence collection. But is this so? Can we point to any negative effects on Canada of Sam's reporting? It seems to the contrary that Sam's work is rather of benefit to protecting us from China's agenda to undermine Canada's sovereignty and national security. If so, this calls upon our government to become more forthcoming with what classified investigations learn about China's malign activities. In this regard, we have a lot to learn from Australia, the UK, and the US. They shouldn't have to give it to Sam, although good thing that they do. May 2023 CTV report entitled, "Why Does Canada Have a Disproportionately High Number of Chinese Diplomats?" revealed that there are 176 Chinese nationals with diplomatic credentials in Canada. In contrast, the United Kingdom's active database of foreign representatives shows that there are 124 Chinese diplomats working on British soil, 50 fewer than there are here in Canada, despite the UK having a larger population of 67.3 million, with 4.7 million people identifying as ethnic Han Chinese in Britain. According to Canada's 2021 census, there are just over 1.7 million people of Chinese origin living in Canada. While Canadian demographics are like Australia, we have nearly 3 times as many Chinese foreign representatives here. Australia has granted diplomatic credentials to 64 Chinese officials compared to Canada's 176. The numbers of Chinese diplomats in Canada indeed look disproportionate, considering that the United Kingdom has 44 accredited representatives in Canada, while Japan has 73. So assuming that China certainly does not require this number of accredited diplomats in Canada to fulfill legitimate diplomatic functions here, the large numbers of diplomatic passport holders from China working here in Canada would likely show that a high proportion of China's diplomatic cohort here in Canada handles diplomatic influence operations that have tipped over into interference activities. Michelle has suggested about 70% of them are not engaged in legitimate diplomatic functions. This is markedly apparent in the uncommonly large Chinese consular establishments in Toronto and Vancouver that Sam has written about at length. The U.S. Department of State Advisor for U.S.-China Bilateral Affairs, Ryan Fedusiuk, has calculated that the budget of the Chinese Communist Party's United Front Work Department exceeds that of the PRC Ministry of Foreign Affairs. This suggests, because China has so much resources into the kinds of activities that Sam has been exposing, that as a matter of national priority, CSIS and the RCMP need considerable augmentation of their resources to match the scale of the resources hostile foreign nations allocate to their programming designed to subvert Canadian parliamentary democracy. We need the same amount of people working against them as are working to subvert our country. In addition, there needs to be a considerable restructuring of these counter-subversion measures, including much stronger integration of the relevant elements of Global Affairs Canada, CSIS, CSE, and the RCMP at the working level. Finally, here in Canada, we can observe former cabinet ministers, former ambassadors to China, and people retired from senior roles in our foreign ministry who have assumed lucrative China-related opportunities after leaving government service. It would be very difficult for Bill C-70, the Foreign Influence, Transparency and Accountability Act, to track the silent implication of future payoffs for officials who took the Chinese Ministry of State Security's bait years earlier and therefore are not following up on documents produced by security agents calling for the government to do something about Chinese malign activities in Canada. So we need other mechanisms to deal with this issue of people after retirement who may have been neutral or possibly even wittingly served Chinese interests from gaining benefits from a foreign power. I would point out that officials who have security clearance in Canada are bound by a lifetime ban on their revealing or benefiting from the classified information that they gain knowledge of in the course of their work. I would suggest a commensurate measure would be lifetime restriction on persons who have had influence on Canada's foreign and security policy from assuming positions that include income or benefits from hostile nation foreign services after they leave government work. So I've recommended here 4 rather obvious and simple actions for the next government to consider after Justice Ogg releases her report on December 31st. But the history of the Canadian government's adopting the recommendations of commissions, whether they're royal commissions or just commissions, has not been good. But if our government blows this matter off with lip service and no substantive follow-up, I believe strongly that history will judge them very badly. Thank
you. Je vais faire mes commentaires en français. Le Canada est vraiment...
You'll see this CSIS agent in an interview later in my video cast. Throughout this interview here, he only speaks French, so I'm just going to skip past this. And we'll continue on.
Good morning. Brian Passif from Toronto Sun. During the Prime Minister's testimony last month, there were allegations of a foreign government's attempted to upend a Liberal candidate's campaign due to their views being contrary to the foreign government's interests. Last year, I wrote about Kevin's ill-fated campaign to run for the Liberals and his allegations that China had a hand in his ouster as a Liberal candidate. Questions for Sam. Do you believe Kevin was that candidate?
I also covered Kevin Vaughan's allegations of what he believed occurred. I did a lengthy videotaped interview with MP Vaughan on his allegations, and I looked into his case for months. I also read your report and others, and I had no idea that this new top-tier case would be tabled at the Hague Commission. When I saw the allegations that a foreign government had allegedly targeted a candidate because of their stances on that government, that type of case appeared consistent with Kevin's allegations. I can share the detail that in my own investigations, I heard from several Liberal Party of Canada sources that alleged after it became clear that Kevin Vaughan would be the nominee in his Toronto riding, a senior Liberal Party member allegedly started to communicate within the party, making efforts to wind back that nomination. So this is an interesting flag for me on the plausibility that MP Vaughan's case could be that serious case alleged in the Hague Commission. Other details that were interesting were that a news story was published alleging sexual misconduct, as you wrote, Brian, about MP Vaughan. He had already, he was already in place to run, so it was up to the Liberal Party and the Prime Minister to withdraw his candidacy, and that occurred. What I gathered from the Prime Minister's testimony is he said he was not aware from intelligence of the allegations. Of course, he didn't refer to what member of his party could have been targeted. But I can say that consistent with the PRC being the by far the biggest targeter of Canadian candidates, whether they be friends of China, neutral and convincible, or foes of China, it's consistent with allegations in New York in an FBI counterintelligence probe that when China's Ministry of State Security wanted to block the congressional candidacy of a U.S. former, an Army veteran who had come from China being a Tiananmen Square activist, the FBI says, and indictments say China didn't want him to run, so local networks, proxies were employed by the Ministry of State Security with plots uncovered in intercepted communications, including that campaign workers be implanted in that individual's campaign to perhaps gather compromising activity. There were a part of the plot was potentially harming the candidate in ways that would preclude them from running, so physical violence. In Canada, I'm aware in my coverage of cases and networks that came up in the Hogue Commission from looking into my reports, I noticed a pattern that an individual that my sources indicated China wanted out of the way, or Chinese proxies wanted out of the way, was the subject of news stories alleging sexual impropriety. And, that my sources indicated that this could have been part of a plot. So to sum up my answer, with everything I know and my...
Sexual improprieties is one of the major attacks that leftists, socialists, and fascists use in order to discredit somebody, because they know how the public feels about it. And it doesn't matter, because even if they're wrong, they'll just print a very small apology somewhere and bury it somewhere in the media, if they even go as far as to apologize. And how many have we seen this liberal government oust out of positions with those types of lies, all to have been proven innocent? Let's move on.
Subject matter expertise on China as the #1 threat actor targeting candidates that they see as critical to their geopolitical aims. It is plausible that Kevin could be the case, and I think the Prime Minister, I judge, would have the answer. CSIS would have the answer. The Hogue Commission probably has the answer. So I think, as I sit here today, in my opinion, if Mr. Vuan was harmed in that way and targeted in that way, I do think, if I was him, I'd want a public explanation and a type of exoneration for a lot of things, if that's what occurred. Let me stress, I've only seen the patterns. This is part of my investigative methods to see, what sources say, can it be corroborated? I do think it's plausible that his case could be that one referred to.
Brian, can I add? So I think in my mind and in my heart, what happened to me was not an accident, but by design. And I obviously reserve getting into, I think, very intricate details on the advice of my legal counsel. But on this point, I think I can say from fact that one of the individuals who are no longer sitting with the Liberal caucus was the MPP for the riding that I now represent federally. And it's important to note that this is a riding that is not only home to Toronto's Chinatown, but where 1 in 7 of my constituents, like me, are of Chinese heritage. So by association, I think one can only assume, to the best of their ability, where there is smoke, there is a lot of fire. There are questions that need to be answered. What precipitated his departure? What did he allegedly do, irrespective of his voting record on China? And I can tell you for a fact that I have never had Toronto's Chinese Consul General on my speed dial, but can others say the same?
We'll go now online. Yeah. People on Zoom, if you have any question right now, please use the raise hand function. There is no question. That will conclude the press conference. Thank you.
Great. Just to conclude, I think it's important to point out that if this happened in the United States, there would be a special prosecutor appointed immediately. And this government is dragging it out. Why? Reluctance is abetting. What's the point of having the law? Why are we protecting individuals who are harming our country, our democracy, our people, and our interests? And this government needs to tell us why. Because frankly, I'm fed up with having to pay the price for it. Because being a doormat is not a policy. And it's time to step up and defend our democracy. Thank you. And thank you to Sam, thank you to Charles, and thank you to Michelle.
Wow, way to go, Kevin. Well, tell me, was that not a direct hit? Boom. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And we'll move on here to what the Turdo Minion Hogue found out. You know, the judge who's linked to all types of things like the Trudeau Foundation, being his dad's lawyer, amongst at least another dozen other links to the family and party. This is her conclusion.
But we must also be realistic. Foreign interference will never be completely eradicated, and it will always be necessary to counter it. This is even more true as the world changes and the world order seems to destabilize. Democracies around the world are under attack from all sides, and the technological resources available to malicious actors are multiplying. It will therefore be a never-ending battle. One of our society's greatest achievements is to have created a political and social order that give us the freedom to choose those who will represent us in government, the right to contribute to discussions about our future, and the chance to live in peace with one another. But protecting these achievements requires that all of society, including each and every one of us, contribute particularly to the war against myths and disinformation. L'une des plus grandes réussites de notre société est d'avoir développé un ordre politique et social qui nous donne la liberté de choisir ceux qui nous représentent et donnera envie because des choses et donnera envie à chacun d'entre nous de contribuer à protéger notre démocratie. Merci beaucoup. Thank you. I'm sorry, I won't take any question because, as you know, the report won't speak for itself. Thank you.
Real transparency as she walks off the stage. And that's
so we partnered with Duda about
what? So I guess there's nothing to worry about. Eh?
Well, the first thing that Commissioner Marie-Josée Augue wanted to do was to essentially reassure Canadians, and she starts that in her sprawling 856-page, 7-volume report to say that there was no impact. Foreign interference caused no impact on the 2019 or 2021 federal election outcomes. Also says there was no impact on the integrity of the last two general elections. One other thing she wants Canadians to know is there are no so-called traitors in Parliament. That had become an issue because last June, the National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians, known by its short form as NSICOP, released a report saying that there were MPs who had provided classified information to foreign governments and or who accepted money from foreign governments. Well, Marie-Josée Augue says, I've taken a look at the classified information, the secret information, and there are no traitors in Parliament. So that's the stuff to reassure. But then there is lots of foreign interference problems that our governments should be paying attention to. She had many criticisms, broadly around 3 areas. First, government takes much too long to act when there are allegations of foreign interference. So it's got to do better on those processes. The federal government's information sharing process is deeply flawed and is not very effective. She made note that important bits of intelligence were never reaching appropriate political decision makers, including the Prime Minister. Finally, she says, above all else, the government is terrible at communications. So she's provided some recommendations along all 3 of those. In fact, there's 51 recommendations in this report. A handful of them she believes the government can act on, what she says, promptly, without having any new legislation before Parliament. And of course, that's the key. We're going to have an election that likely begins in late March or early April. And so what changes do you want to make before that election? There's a few, but there's no way all 51 will get done. For example, Commissioner Og is calling for some broad changes to the Canada Elections Act, specifically tightening up rules around how parties nominate their candidates. That nomination process, Og said, was a, quote, gateway to foreign interference, and she's got some ideas about tightening up, but there's no way that can be done before the next election, and so fixing our elections laws is going to have to wait for the next government. David Aiken, Global News, Ottawa.
Right. So everything's good. They don't need to call Parliament back. They can settle all of this in-house. You don't have to worry, Canadians. The Liberals have got it. And don't worry, because it's fixed. We're safe. Nothing to worry about.
Nor have I seen any evidence to suggest that there are currently so-called traitors in Parliament.
Are there current or past parliamentarians, senators or MPs, is there clear evidence of them collaborating with foreign countries?
Yes. The number is not 11, the number is over 50.
Now this is Northern Perspective. These two have created a channel that has surpassed all others media in the media. They specialize in politics, and they are the most honest and thorough at their job than any other I know of. I highly recommend you subscribing to their channel, and I commend them on the work that they have done. Personally, I never miss an episode. Their link is under the video, as well as all the other links used, so you can reference them. Make sure you subscribe and pay attention to them, because their channel is growing, their influence is growing, and I haven't seen them make a single mistake yet. Incredibly thorough. Now pay attention.
Justice Hogue released her controversial report on foreign interference on January 28th. And the controversy didn't end there, as former senior CSIS intelligence officers' harsh criticism of the report went missing from the CBC's website. Although we did end up eventually seeing the footage and releasing a video on it, we still felt that there was a lot left unsaid. So we decided to do some serious digging and ended up securing an interview with that same man. He is a former investigator for the RCMP, former chief of the Asia Pacific region for CSIS, has a PhD, has been CEO of a corporation specializing in threat risk assessment and counterintelligence analysis, and most recently has served as professor of criminology at the University of Ottawa and Université de Sherbrooke. Northern Perspective is proud to present Michel Junot-Katsuya.
Let's take a look.
This is the guy that I said would be on my show later on.
We saw your reaction to the Hogue report on your brief interview with Artie Pohl on CBC. We found that it was interesting that that interview wasn't really available on the live stream of CBC for the entire day, and we only saw it posted to CBC. I think it was about 3 days later.
The video he's talking about came on. They ran it once during the live reel, and then they deleted it off of their site. They actually edited it off of their site. They didn't want Canadians to see it. Now, whether or not it came from further up the ladder within the office itself, or whether or not it was a directive given from the government, we still don't know. But they did end up putting the video back on a few days later because there were enough people complaining. Remember, your voice isn't alone. Speak up. It makes a difference.
That your interview was actually posted. So we wanted to get you on the show because you seem to have one of the few, I will say, raw takes on what the Hogue report actually showed. We've done our analysis, but what's your overall impression of the public inquiry, the witnesses that testified in the conclusions that Justice Hogue drew in her report?
That's a great question, and would take quite a while to maybe answer it. I'll try to be brief. Basically, I got what I expected. If you return at the beginning, after the announcement by the government that the inquiry would take place, I was asked to predict what would happen, and I got exactly what I predicted, which was a sweet and sour. Sweet in the sense that they admitted that there is foreign interference, but we knew that for the last 30 years. And over 300 witnesses went in front of 5 different parliamentary committees to say so. So didn't really need that. Sour in a sense because we've discovered much more, which also was important, and some very, very controversial information came out of the inquiry. I don't think the government was expecting that. But the sour part is that the judge was not harsh as she could have. It was clear from the beginning that the government wanted to be very, very limited in the mandate. They had to look at the election of 2019, 2020. And they also set the tone by saying, and we have to look at how CSIS can be better at communicating with us, with the government. Well, wait a minute. During the interview, the director Vigneault, former director Vigneault of CSIS, went not once, but twice. And he said, listen, I met directly with the Prime Minister. I asked several times to meet with the Prime Minister, and I was also several times prevented to meet with him. And when finally I met with him, twice I was asked to modify the report that CSIS has written.
Now, this is how the WEF appointed Privy Council and the other puppets around protect Trudeau. First, would you trust him with a lot of this information? No. The guy's got an IQ of 86. But these are the little tricks that they use to protect him. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. Let's move on.
I think what is most jarring for Canadians hearing the results of the report are 7 months ago, we had the Zenzikop report come out, and you had people saying there's 11 parliamentarians, past or present, that have wittingly or semi-wittingly, let's just translate that, they've knowingly collaborated with foreign states against the interest of Canada and Canadians. And Hogue's report, she comes out and says there's no traitors in Parliament, and the former chair of the Zenzikop committee says, oh yeah, that's what our report basically said, which it didn't. And then we looked at the report, yet there's clear examples, even in the report, that talk about people trying to, or MPs trying to influence their colleagues, feeding intelligence back to at least India. You have the Han Dong situation. So let's just ask the question. Are there current or past parliamentarians, senators or MPs, is there clear evidence of them collaborating with foreign countries?
Yes. And the number is not 11, the number is over 50. We have the name, we have the evidence, we know when it happened, we know how it happened, and it could have led to investigation in the past and everything. But one of the challenges...
Well, so now that we know that our government is bought and paid for by China in this instance, oh, don't worry, I'll be moving on to the WF infiltration in another episode. But wait, there's more.
It's Sam.
For me, there's a baseline here, and that's why my book.
Hi, this is Daniela Cambone. Welcome back to the Daniela Cambone Show. Today, we are taking a deep dive into analyzing and figuring out why President Donald Trump has set his sights on Canada. We all know he's threatened economic force with 25% tariffs, and he's even talked about Canada possibly becoming the 51st state. But why? We're going to get to the bottom of this today with my guest, who has an interesting theory as to why Donald Trump wants Canada so bad. He is Sam Cooper. He's a Canadian investigative journalist. He's also the founder of the Bureau.News and the author of Willful Blindness: How a Network of Narcos, Tycoons, and CCP agents have infiltrated the West. Sam, so nice to meet you. Welcome to the show.
Great to be with you, Daniela.
Yeah, I want to give a shout out to our mutual friend, Jonathan Roth, who reached out to me and said, you gotta speak to my friend Sam, who's done incredible work here and just written a mind-blowing book as to, kind of piecing the pieces together here. And it makes sense now as to why Donald Trump has really set his sights on Canada. So I want to get to the bottom of this with you today. So like I said, welcome to the show. Your book title kind of gives it away, how China is really the missing piece of the puzzle here. Tell us your thesis, Sam.
Yeah, I mean, you're right to point to my book. The very first edition, on the cover, it shows a graphic photo of Vancouver, on a world map, with fentanyl pills exploding out of Vancouver and going around the world. So you could say that, for 10 years, I've been researching the thesis that Canada has become a node of essentially Chinese infiltration and organized crime activity, especially in Vancouver. And this was hard for people to believe, but Vancouver has become a production hub for China and a transshipment hub for fentanyl precursors, to the point where it's now established, even though I was well ahead of the curve in writing up this thesis, that Canada is a fentanyl exporter nation. And so this gets to what Donald.
So links to EB and the NDP party, as well as the Liberal Party before them, involved in all of these same issues, I'll be discussing in future episodes. And don't worry, there's a pile of them as well. Make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss out.
Donald Trump is saying, it's hard for many people to believe that, Canada could be put in the same category as Mexico in terms of endangering the United States with fentanyl, with illegal immigration and human trafficking. But my research has shown that, indeed, this is the fear and concern of U.S. intelligence community, U.S. military and law enforcement, really for decades, that Canada's weak enforcement against transnational crime, weak control of borders, has allowed international organized crime with linkages to hostile states, most specifically China, but also Iran, Middle Eastern states that are not friends of the United States, have set up very strongly in Canada. So I do think that as a Canadian, I have to say, I'm not pleased with Donald Trump's rhetoric. I think there's a lot of the art of the deal going on when he's trolling and saying, you're going to be the 51st state. But I do say that there's very deep concerns that Canada is being used by China in a very sophisticated economic and really criminal way. I do think that's correct.
Wow. Well, you have just dropped a massive truth bomb for many who, I know that some are going to be watching saying, oh, we know this story. But for many, including myself, I had never seen it from this optic. So take us.
So who else helps through all of this Chinese interference to support and push liberal propaganda?
Took part under Trudeau's tenure. He's aware of this. Has he commented on it? Have you spoken to Prime Minister Trudeau or received comment from his office on this, Sam?
I have repeatedly sought comment from Justin Trudeau's office and his top officials. Specifically, I'll give you an example. In my book, I write about a donation that comes from a Vancouver-based tycoon who is a People's Liberation Army military veteran who my documented research connects to BC casino money laundering investigations. And I asked Mr. Trudeau and his staff, can you explain this donation and does it not seem suspicious? And essentially they give a boilerplate answer to the effect that the Liberal Party of Canada follows all relevant election financing rules. And, you know, in my book, I stress that the photographs of Mr. Trudeau with individuals that are documented officials, essentially, in China's foreign influence arm, which is the United Front, they're difficult to explain away. And I do think I have some inkling of feeling that the US government is also concerned with those types of funding relationships Mr. Trudeau has. But to reiterate, I haven't had a response from Mr. Trudeau. I'll add this. Even a US congressional report in 2023 now points to concerns of a major donation to Mr. Trudeau's foundation that reportedly came from a United Front official that was tasked by Beijing. Very suspicious.
Well, this begs my next question. I think you just answered it. And it's not a naive question, okay? But why do all the politicians, if this is true, turn a blind eye? Because it's just lining their pockets, Sam?
For me, there's a baseline here, and that's why my book was called Willful Blindness. At a high level, trade policy, whether it's in the United Kingdom now, whether it's been Germany, certainly Canada, even the United States, there are many elite business persons and politicians that push for those deeper trade ties with Beijing. So you could say that Justin Trudeau, Jean Chrétien, Paul Martin, even some Conservative Party leaders in Canada have bent over to, take, let's just say, funds from China and have turned a blind eye to the what I call the dark underpinnings, which is trade-based money laundering, fentanyl money laundering, fentanyl deaths, and
yep.
Right, this is what Donald Trump is now saying.
Well,
but and I guess I wanted to say your question. Are there actual dirty payoffs? Old school bags of cash going to politicians? I was being a little diplomatic. I don't have the evidence that Mr. Trudeau has received a bag of cash in a back alley.
Of course.
But I do have the evidence that he's being funded by people that are connected to organized crime. That's indisputable.
Trump has been clear about why he wants to do it to Mexico, citing China. Now, from what I've seen, he hasn't linked China to Canada yet. Obviously, he's aware of this backdoor, right? I mean, do you have any insights as to perhaps he has mentioned China, but like I said, from the reports I've seen, he hasn't tied China to Canada yet? Or why would he possibly not say it?
That's a great question. I would go back in time by saying that I reported on a letter from Marco Rubio.
By the way, this is Daniela Cambone. She's on ITM, another amazing journalist who has great guests. She has got the most intuitive and inquisitive questions. Like, she's not afraid to ask. She's not afraid to dig. I haven't seen her push any type of an agenda. She seems to be like shoot from the hip. Definitely click on the link and follow her as well. Again, a little bit more diverse on what she talks about. Obviously, ITM trading. But once again, definitely worth the watch. Make sure you click on the link and watch this whole episode. Literally, this will blow your socks off.
now Secretary of State, a few months ago, he wrote to Canada's Trade Minister, Mary Ng, and said, why is Canada a backdoor for slave-produced goods in Xinjiang that have been blocked by the United States and then rerouted through Canada, transshipped, and come and stopped again at the U.S. border? So that's not about fentanyl, but that is about a now senior Trump official telling Canada's trade minister, you're not doing anything to stop these bad goods from China, and you're hurting the United States. So I do believe that Trump's office at a high level is concerned about China. Why he hasn't directly said, what lower level officials that I talk to say, that Canada triads that is Chinese organized crime in Toronto and Vancouver, are command and control for the fentanyl money laundering of the type that was run through Toronto Dominion Bank. They're the bosses of Mexican cartel money laundering in Canada, and that's very strange. Mr. Trump hasn't said that yet, but what he did say the other day, when reporters asked, are you just trying to, is this a ploy to get Canada to redo, its trade deal? And he said, no, there's massive fentanyl coming from Canada. And as you know, as everyone knows, that fentanyl originates in China.
Amazing.
I skipped a part here. I definitely want you guys to get a listen to. It deals with the other types of organizations that are helping. My bad for skipping this.
Chinese fentanyl I'm talking about, but I would say that Mr. Barton and really elites around the world, but very specifically in Canada, are involved in direct dealings with Chinese state-owned enterprises. And in my research, which is supported by the U.S. intelligence and Canadian intelligence community, these either consigliaries like Mr. Barton, people that are pushing trade with China, or industrialists, whether they be in Quebec, whether they be in Melbourne, whether they be in Europe, that do dealings with Chinese state-owned enterprises and push their governments to do more dealings, are under the table, I say, involved in Chinese intelligence influence operations. There's a quid pro quo in those dealings.
So wait, but let me ask you, because a quick Google search of Dominic Barton shows to me he's currently the chairman of Rio Tinto and Leapfrog Investments based in London. He previously serves as a Canadian ambassador to China. So what was his response? Did you ever hear from Dominic Barton?
No, I tried to question Mr. Barton when he was called to testify in Canada's, it's called the Canada-China Committee. This is a few years ago. I was one of the reporters that sat down and watched as a conservative politician named Garnet Genuis asked, would Mr. Barton disclose what his or McKinsey's relationship was with these state-owned enterprises.
Now, McKinsey, does that name ring a bell? They're the organization that's raking the money in from the Trudeau Liberal government. This organization has their fingers in many countries, especially through businesses with ties to the WEF. And who do they want to replace Trudeau with?
Is in China, and we've never had the answer. So when I point to people like the Desmarais family in Montreal and their power corporation, which is, according to intelligence, involved in dealings with Chinese state-owned enterprises, which I say are involved in Chinese intelligence, I have not heard back from people like Desmarais or Mr. Barton or people at that level. But let me tell you this, Alex Joske, the well-known academic investigator of Chinese intelligence operations, says people at the level of Mr. George Soros have been targeted in these sort of elite trade influence operations. And so the question here is whether those people sort of wittingly acquiesce, or do they know that they're being targeted for influence in China's trade? And so I think that sort of question would extend to Mr. Mark Carney, who's now running for the Liberal leadership as well.
Well, I want to say.
Well, there you have it. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. There's a heck of a lot more out there. This should have brought the government crashing down. And why it's so vital to like, subscribe, and especially share it with those who are not computer savvy or just brainwashed by the legacy media. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this episode. Make sure you leave a comment on what you thought. I'm currently building a studio. This place is a mess right now. And obviously learning a lot about this software. So if you guys would like to get a daily dose of Canadian news and politics, make sure that you like and subscribe. I am Elias Tagai, and I will see you on the next episode.